Page 122, okay.
So, daily Rambam for Thursday, Tezai Menachem of Tavshin Pei, the 6th Perek of Hilchos Deios. So after we learned the general ideas with the Rambam regarding Deios, traits and behavior, which was all based somehow on the first mitzvah Hilchos Deios, which is Lihidamis B'drachav, to follow Hashem's ways. So now the Rambam is going back to all the other mitzvahs that were listed in the beginning of Hilchos Deios. In this parak, we're going to go through mitzvahs 2 through 8. So number 2 is Lidavik b'yadav, to cleave to those who know him, to good people. Number 3 is Lev Yisraelim, to love our fellows. Dalet is Lev Yisraelim, to love Gerim, proselytes. Hey, Shaloi Lisnei Achim, not to hate our brothers. Vav Leichiach is to rebuke when appropriate. Zayin Shalom Panim, number 7 is not to embarrass. And Chesed Shleila Anes Amilalim, not to torment unfortunate people. And this is all under the general umbrella of behavior, how we interactions with other people. Okay. As an introduction to getting to the first mitzvah of this parak, which is to cleave, to connect with those who know Hashem, the Rambam first states this idea in a more conceptual kind of style, like in the same style that we had in the previous parakim. That this is just yet another way, another piece in the whole picture of how a person has to work on himself to make sure that he is a good person. So, Halacha Aleph, Derech B'riyasai Shel Adam Lias Nimshach B'Deios V'Maisav Achar Reav V'Chaveirav V'Neag V'Minig Anshem Medinasei. So it's the nature, the way a person was created, that he's drawn in his traits and in his behavior after his friends, his fellows, and he behaves generally the way people of his country behave. So meaning, even though in the beginning of Perek Aleph we said that that everyone has their own unique traits, we made it sound like it's very individualistic, but that explains a lot of the differences between people, just the individual personalities of different people. But now that I'm saying there's really another factor, which is where you live. And that knowing where you live automatically explains a large part of your behavior before we even get to who you are as an individual. And the same goes for your group of friends. It also has a strong influence, which is incidentally a very powerful idea it's very relevant today in all kinds of discussions. Today you have tools that based on your zip code, they can tell you so much about you. The average person in this zip code, we can predict a lot about your life just based on that. And of course, not too long ago, there were stereotypes among Jews of a Litvak, a Hungarian, a Galicianer. So we see that there's this concept. It's very built into society. That even though what's the difference between one Jew from Eastern Europe and another Jew from Eastern Europe? But there are differences. So it explains a lot of a person's character. So therefore, in light of that, so therefore, a person has to connect with tzaddikim, with the righteous people, and always sit with the wise people, so he learns from their behavior. And he should avoid the wicked people who live in darkness, so he doesn't learn from their behavior. So, in other words, it's not enough to focus on your own midas, on your own traits, because that's only a certain percentage of who you are. And if your surroundings also influence you, so if you're obligated to be a good person, that includes not just working on yourself, but also choosing the surroundings that you are in. So the Rambam starts over here, and this part of Halacha Aleph, he's speaking about the closer, your actual circle of friends, the people that you know. That's what he's saying. You have to sit with the Chacham. With the messages that you hang out with wise people, you end up like them. You hang out with fools, you end up like them. And he quotes from the beginning of Tehillim. Everyone knows the beginning of Tehillim. It starts off and says that fortunate is the man who doesn't follow the Rishayim, the Chatoim, the Leitzim. It doesn't say fortunate is the man who isn't a Rasha or a Letz. It says he's going with the Rishayim. So now the context there still sounds more like he doesn't behave like them, but the Rambam is taking out of this pasuk that it's also literally you're not halach with the Rishayim, you don't hang out with the Rishayim. So that's the message here, that you're better off if you don't hang out with these people, literally. Now we spoke about the more immediate surroundings. Now the Rambam expands it to the country as a whole, like he mentioned earlier. It's like he was in a country where the whole overall behavior in the country is no good. They're not following the right path in this place. So he should pick up and move to somewhere where the people are good. Rambam says, what if all the countries you heard of, are all no good? Maybe there's some country you didn't hear of, but the ones you heard of, like we said, even though this is usually based on older sources, but every once in a while the Rambam mentions something from his time. So he says, in our time, I myself don't know of a country that would qualify. So seemingly it's no longer relevant where you're going because you're stuck. Or there is a place you want to go to. Let's say there was a place, but you can't go to that place. Why? Due to armies, due to sickness. So in those days especially, it wasn't such a simple thing to pick up and go from one place to another. So either for personal reasons, you're not up to it, and of course travel back then was much more difficult. Or for global reasons, you have countries that don't get along with each other. Not so easy to go from one country to another. Now, even if nowadays maybe it's not so common, but actually right now we're in a situation where actually traveling from country to country is very not simple. There's a global chayli actually. Anyway, so yeshiv levada yechidi. So what do you do then? So you have to sit alone in your country, in your home. Just stay in your house. Stay away from people. Like the words in Eicha we just read recently, that person sits alone and is quiet. Now the context there isn't necessarily connected to what we're talking about here, but it's sort of it's the image of the Yeshiv Badad V'Yidaim, someone who's the loner. In Perek it's brought for someone who sits and learns Torah by himself, and the other one is borrowing the expression to describe, this is someone who's a loner in a good sense. What if the people in this country are so bad? What if they're so bad they don't let you live there unless you participate in their troubling behavior? So then you have no choice but so you have to go, you have to ditch society, you have to run out to the hills, to the caves, to the thorny areas, to the deserts. You can't allow yourself to be led on the path of the sinners. It says in Yirmiyah, the pasuk in the full context of Perek in Yirmiyah, it says, he's describing everyone's so no good. He says, I wish I could just go out to the desert and hang out there. Now, it doesn't say clearly in the pasuk there that it was a situation where they didn't let him sit alone at home, and it doesn't actually say that he ran away. He just said, I want to. But we got the general idea that in some situations it might be better to just run away to the desert. And I think in Yirmiyah elsewhere we see there are other situations where Yirmiyah actually was compelled to do things that he didn't want due to the people around him. Now the Rebbe actually brings this whole keta a number of times in a positive sense, and even practically there are letters from the Rebbe to people saying your choice, where you're moving, doesn't seem like a good idea in light of this Rambam. And I believe there's a sikh from the Rebbe. The Rebbe actually emphasizes that this is how we have to. It's not like we diminish from this idea. It's not like we don't hold of this idea. We very much hold of this idea, except if it's shlichus, and shlichus has its own special category that overrides this. But if you're not on shlichus, then you're going to be influenced, and it's no good. So now that the Rambam introduced it in that way, now we're actually going to get to the actual mitzvah number 2 of Deios, to connect with these kinds of good people. So here we're gonna see this as a mitzvah. It says mitzvah. It's a positive commandment to cleave to the wise people, to learn from their behavior. Shenamar uboy sidbak, says you should cleave to Hashem. And the Rambam borrows already the lashon from the Gemara. Gemara in Ksubas brings other psukim there. Atam adveikim l'daf gabay. The Rambam is going to bring l'daf gabay at the end of the halacha. And it says, can you connect to the Shekhinah? There it says, but here the Rambam, this is the second time in the Gemara where it says without it. Just can a person connect to the Shekhinah? So what did Chachamim say there? What did Chazal say in response? You should connect with the sages and their students. So this is also all from that Lashon HaGemara there. The person should try to marry the daughter of a Talmid Chacham, Yasi Bitul Talmid Chacham, and he should take us to Talmid Chacham as his son-in-law, Valach of Lishtas and Talmid Chacham, and eat and drink, Lasses Perek Matiyah with Talmid Chacham, and do business. So the examples here are not to sit and learn with Talmid Chacham. It doesn't say Uvay Sidbak, therefore you should sit and learn with them a lot. The examples in the Gemara and the Rambam are specifically from the other aspects of life. Eating, drinking, business. Well, maybe they're eating at home. Maybe you came to their home. Maybe that's okay. They're not. The Chacham can't go to your house. Maybe you can go to his house. The Gemara doesn't fully spell out, well, what's the... It says, a voice said, Bak, you should do all these things with him. It doesn't actually spell out what the benefit is. So the Rambam here is putting it into this wider context that by interacting with them in all aspects of life, so that has an influence on all aspects of your life. And even though he doesn't spell it out, but how does it end up being a voice said Bak? If you connect to them, so then you ultimately end up being Mekayim the previous mitzvah, which is to connect to Hashem and follow Hashem. So that would be the idea. Shenamar, so connect with them in any kind of way. Shenamar l'dafka bay. This other pasuk that also many pasukim and Devarim that all say the same thing, that you have to connect to Hashem, which we say is by proxy of the Chacham. Now he quotes famous line from Perek dust yourselves and yourself in the dust of their feet and drink their words thirstily. So there you might have thought it's referring to the Beis Medrash, but the Rambam is coming and saying, no, it means in general. Okay. Now we're up to the third mitzvah in Hilchos Deios, which is to love your fellow. Halacha Gimel, mitzvah kol adam lev es kol echad v'echad mi Yisrael kegufay. We're commanded to love every fellow Jew like ourselves. Shenemar v'ahavta l'reacha kamaycha. You should love your fellow like yourself. All right, classic. Lefichach tzarech sheyisaper b'shivchay v'lochas al mameynai kameishu chas al mamein atzmai v'reitza b'chavayit atzmai. So how is it actually? What does that mean practically? So the Rambam, how do you know if you're loving your fellow like yourself? So the Rambam gives a very, very technical, not an emotional test. It gives a technical. What does it mean? It means you're saying praiseworthy things. You're praising them, and you're very careful with their money, the way you'd care about your own self and the way you'd care about your own dignity. So you treat others in those areas the way you'd want to be treated, the way you treat yourself. And like I mentioned yesterday, he mentions the idea of Yisaper b'shivchay, and yesterday regarding the Talmid Chacham it says Yisaper b'shivchay and not the Gnus, and the Rebbe explained how it's different, how it's not the same thing. Right, so that's the test. The test is actually how would you want yourself to be treated. If that's how you treat others, then you're being Mekayim v'ahavta l'reacha kamecha. And what's the flip side of Reitze b'chavayit atzmai, of treating someone the way you'd want to be treated? And if you honor yourself, if you score points at the expense of your friend's shame, you lose your portion of the world to come. This is the second time in I believe in Mishnah Torah that Rambam mentioned Eilam Haba. The first time was in Perek Dalet of Yesodei HaTorah, where he said the dafka learning halacha, knowing what's asr and mutter, is the great good that Hashem gave us to settle this world and to inherit the next world. And there's going to be definitely later in the Rambam and Hilchos Tshuva, I believe there's going to be a lot more about the Rambam's whole view of Eilam Haba. But anyway, in this case, he's taking this line from Yerushalmi in Chagiga, and the context in Yerushalmi is actually regarding someone who doesn't treat Ma'aser Merkava, very sensitive, holy topics, he doesn't treat them sensitively. So someone who's just showing off and talking about Ma'aser Bereshis in public, he thinks he's doing something good, but he's shaming Hashem, and the Reisi says, I'm eskabed b'klein chaveirei and lechelek l'maba. If you bathe in glory on your friend's expense, you would lose your chelik on Elam Haba. So for sure, if you do that to Hashem, if you do that at Hashem's expense, like Kol Shekain, so the Rambam took that phrase out and put it here, that the flip side of B'Havta V'Yecha Kamaycha is that you're again, like scoring points at your friend's expense. Of course, Chassidus says it's a very unique way of explaining the whole concept of Avos Yisrael. We don't have time to mention every fundamental point, of which there are many in these Perakim. So now to mitzvah number 4 of Hilchos Deios, which is to love Gerim. Halacha Dalet, Avas Hager Sheba V'Nichnas Tachas Kanfei HaShechina, to love the love of a ger who came and entered under the wings of the Shechina, which is a term that you find a lot in Chazal. Shtei mitzvahs asay. There's actually you're actually doing a double mitzvah. Achas, number 1, Pnei Shu B'Chalal Reim. Number 1, he's like any other yid, V'Havta V'Yecha Kamaycha. But Achas, second one is Pnei Shu Ger, just specifically, uniquely, because he is a ger. But Torah Amra, and the Torah said, V'ahavta Mesager, and the Rambam says it's like a diuk here, a kvetch. He says, Tziva al avas hager kamoish tziva al avas shmoi. The way in which Hashem commanded to love the ger is reminiscent, is akin to how Hashem said to love him. Shenamar v'ahavta Hashem alekecha. So it says v'ahavta Hashem alekecha. It says v'ahavta mesager, so they're equivalent. And the Rambam adds, HaKadosh Baruch Hu atzmei oyev gerim, Shenam v'oyev ger. Hashem himself loves gerim, it says v'oyev ger. So the Rambam what the Rambam seems to be saying here is that the love of gerim is a greater love than a regular Avos Yisrael. Because by early Avos Yisrael, he just gave a very practical, he just said technical, this is how. And here, he's going out of his way to say this is like loving Hashem. And the pasuk at the end, v'oyev ger, it's actually one long context. It says, Hashem lekeichem, it says in Devarim, Hashem lekeichem, hu lekeichem, the great God, oisem mishmei yosem v'amana v'oyev ger. Hashem loves the ger. And then it says, v'ahavtem es hager, ki geirim ha'yisem eretz mitzrayim. So it's actually one long context. So it says, Hashem loves geirim, so you should also love geirim. So it sounds like, according to the Rambam, kum tois, that it's taka a greater mitzvah. So before we continue, I should point out there's a very, very famous shuvah of the Rambam on this topic to Rabbi Vadya Hager. And it goes like this. The Shaila was, the Vadya Hager wrote to the Rambam that he had an argument with his Rebbe. He said the Yishmaelim, the Muslims of that time, they're not Oyev Avodah Zarah. Whatever the religion is, it's not idolatrous. And this Vadya's Rebbe said they are Oyev Avodah Zarah because the Muslims have a thing where they put a rock, or they throw a rock in Mecca, something like that. And this Rabbi wanted to claim that this practice is actually a form of markulis, that there's idol worshipping involving throwing a rock. That was the claim. And he says, he responded to you very inappropriately. The Rambam is restating to the ger what he wrote to him. Until you got depressed, you were embarrassed, and the Rebbe is like, I'm going to answer you, you're a fool, I'm answering you with your foolishness. So the Rambam says, first of all, you're right. They are not Avodah Zarah. And there's a whole piece on that, which we may get to when we get to this topic in Hilchos Avodah Zarah. And then the Rambam continues, says, "Vasher yeshav charav shleika haygen ve'etzivcha ve'chlimcha ve'karach eksil." The Rambam says, "Aveda g'dayla b'yadai ve'cheit gadol chata," big sin. I assume that it was a shaygig, so we should ask mechila, even though you're his Talmud, and then he should fast and cry out to Hashem, "Ulay yiskaper le v'yimchol le hakelis al." Maybe Hashem will forgive him. V'chishikar hayazah. Was this guy drunk? He didn't know that there are 36 places where the Torah warns about the ger. The ger le'saina is one of them. Einos Dvarim, which we're going to learn in a separate section, specifically Einos Dvarim for a ger.
But this ger was going away from Derech Yishmael into Yahadus?
Possibly. I don't know if that's.
There was a transition. There's not that he stayed. I'm not referring to the ger in terms of. He's just Yishmael.
It doesn't say clearly that he was himself formerly a Muslim, but I think that's the subtext here. So he says if he was right and you were wrong, he still should have been nice to you. He still should have said it in a nice way. Kol shekain that you were right and he was wrong. And he says that while this guy is sitting and trying to figure out Yishmaelim, are they Oyev Avodah Zarah, are they not? He should have cared more. What's more important? He should have been more careful about the kas, that he got angry and he embarrassed the ger tzedek. He cares so much about halacha. He should care about this halacha more. And Chazal say kol hakayos is koyev Avodah Zarah. And the Rambam says a general statement says you should know that the chayva, the Torah, the obligation from the Torah for gerim is tremendous. It says for the father and mother we have kavod, meira, honor and fear. The neviim we have to listen. And you can honor someone and fear someone and listen to someone without actually loving him. You don't have to love someone in order to do all those things. For the gerim, he says, specifically for the gerim, we have to have an ava rabba hamesud alev. It has to be a strong, personal, powerful emotion. V'ahavtem es hager, and he borrows the language. It's parallel to v'ahavta es Hashem. And Hashem himself is oyev ger, again parallel to here. Shnei oyev ger. And the fact that he called you a fool, it's very strange. He says, can we call someone like you a fool? Someone who abandoned his father, his homeland, his nation, his kingdom, and their power, because they're a powerful nation. And somehow he understood that this is the nation to join, even though they're disgusted by everyone and they're enslaved by everyone. And he knew that this is their true religion. And he figured out that this is correct, and all the other religions, he says, are stolen, are plagiarized from our religion. Connecting back to what we learned earlier, in Hilchos at the end about Nevuah, this one adds, this one takes away. They're all taking our religion and ruining it and copying it and attributing all kinds of things to Hashem. This one is undermining this one's saying that. He recognized, he figured it all out, and he went after Hashem, and he came to the holy path, and he went to Achas Kanfei Shechina, and he's in the dust of the feet of Moshe Rabbeinu, and he loves the mitzvahs, and he wants to be close to Hashem and connect with the malachim, etc., etc. You're going to call someone like that a ksil? Someone like that you're going to call a fool? Chalila, you're not a ksil. You're smart, you're intelligent, you're so special. You're a Talmud of Avram Avinu, who also abandoned his family and followed Hashem. Misha Beirach as Avram, and gave him schar, who Yavarich Eischa, and give you your schar, etc. And Rambam ends off and signs off. Now this famous shuv is actually mentioned by the Rebbe a number of times. The Mashal Nakut Sichas Chelek Havav Mishpatim Gimel is a sicha on the Rambam in Isuri Bia about a ger. It says there that Bizman Azeh She'ein Shem Karban Tzarech Milo Tviloch She'ibana Beis Hamikdash Yavi Karban. That now that there's no karbanis, so really a ger needs three things: Mila, Tvila, and Karban. But now there's no Karban, so he'll bring when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt. So the Rogachev actually says that when it comes to the aspect of Kadshim, LeMikri Yisrael Gomer, the gerus is not complete. He's only like a Yisrael Chaldavar for other things. So the Rogachev takes it to this idea to an extreme and says that the gerim are in fact not complete gerim in some sense, because they're lacking the carbon, and that introduces that. Well, that means a yid is connected to carbon. Even nowadays, a yid has a shaykhis to karbanas. It doesn't. It doesn't say anywhere that. I mean, the Rambam himself doesn't say it. But there's something lacking. The Rebbe finds that very troubling. He says we can't say that the Rambam would even agree with that statement, because the Rambam writes that Ravadia Hager, that a ger is so great, better than every other yid. So how could the Rambam say that? The Rambam was writing it to someone in his time. So how could it be that he would say that actually when it comes to karbanis, the ger isn't considered a complete yid? That ben noyach lekadshim. The Rogachev says that he has a din of a guy when it comes to karbanis.
As the lack of the korban being ma'akiv.
It doesn't spell out what that, he just says, Bana Beis HaMikdash Yavi Karban. So the Rebbe has a whole explanation there that as long as there's no Beis HaMikdash, the ger is not lacking anything. Because the Mila and Tevila, without a Mila and Tevila, you're not a ger b'chlal. Karban is removing a problem. And if there's no Beis HaMikdash, so there's no problem to remove. Once the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt, the problem will come back, we'll fix the problem. Right now we have to say he's 100%, so that's another place, that's a place where the Rebbe brings this Shuvah about Ravadia the ger, to say, how can the Rambam say that the ger today isn't a complete ger? Anyway, okay, let's move on to mitzvah hey, not to hate our fellow Jew. Halacha hey, kol haseine echem Yisrael b'livoi oiver b'loi saseh. Whoever hates a Jew in his heart, that's the transgression. Shenemar le'sisna as achicha bil vavecha. Now, the opposite of obvious Yisrael isn't necessarily hatred; it's just a lack of love. Like I said earlier, that what's obvious Yisrael? To treat him a certain way. What's the opposite? If you don't care about him, not caring about someone is enough already to be over an obvious Yisrael. So this is an additional thing, a specific personal hatred, and this is dafka, something in your heart, nothing to do with action. It has to be a feeling that you have. And it says, but there's no malchus for this, because there's no action, it's purely in your heart. And the Torah specifically is only talking about personal hatred and not activity. If you hit him or said something nasty, even though of course you're not allowed to, and those are other halachas, you specifically are not transgressing leisisna with that. So it goes all the way to the extreme. Yeah. So it's purely in your heart, and those other things we're going to learn.
Is pure love, not hate.
Oh, you're saying it doesn't prove that you hate him, right? But it's a different problem. It's a different halacha. Yeah. So now for mitzvah number 6, rebuke. So kshiach ish leish. So Rambam starts speaking on a personal level. If someone wrongs you, don't keep silent and just be hateful. Like it says, so this is the flip side of leisisna. Leisisna is don't hate your friend. Now, what if you actually have a reason to hate your friend? You have two choices. Either you could walk around with that anger, and that would be leisisna, or the other way to deal with it would be to do the mitzvah, which is to rebuke him to his face, to confront him. So the lav is not to keep quiet and just be upset, and the essay is to confront them. Now, what's the pasuk of Ivlei Dibros? It's in Shmuel, the story of Amnon and Tamar, that Avshalom and Amnon were two half-brothers, the sons of David, and Avshalom had a sister whose name was Tamar, and after the whole story, Amnon forced himself on Tamar, and then comes this pasuk, that after that happened, Avshalom never spoke again to Amnon, not good, not bad, because he simply hated him so much. And then the story continues that he came up with a way he killed Amnon, and then he escaped, and then all the drama that happened afterwards with David and Avshalom. But from here we see just an illustration. Right, that the love to Tamar was Ava Tluya B'Davar, because it says afterwards he also he didn't like afterwards he lost his love for Tamar. But here we're speaking about Avshalom and Amnon, and how Avshalom loathed Amnon so much, and this pasuk is just Rambam is plucking this pasuk out of the story to just illustrate what we mean when we talk about someone who has such a powerful hatred. Before he even did anything to Amnon, just the fact that he wouldn't speak to him, that's illustrative of the kind of hatred we're talking about. And what we're talking about here is to do the opposite, to confront, not to keep it to yourself.
What's Avshalom's duty to what? To speak?
He should have gone over to Amnon and say, "Hey, I have beef with you. I'm upset. Let's talk it out." Yeah. Mitzvah lovely idea,
silent treatment.
Right, exactly that. Mitzvah lovely idea, lama sisli kach v'kach, lama chatasli b'davar pleni. You have to confront him. The Rambam gives like a phrase. Why did you do this and this to me? Why did you wrong me with this and that? Shenamar hechech techechas amisacha v'leisisa alav chet. It's actually one long pasuk. Leisisna sechicha b'lavacha hechech techechas amisacha leisisa alav chet. And leisisa we're going to explain later. So it's all one big thing. And if the person, once you confront it and the person says, "Yeah, you're right, please forgive me," then you should forgive him. That's why you're confronting him, to resolve it. And you shouldn't be cruel about it. You should be generous and gracious. And the example we see is from Avram. What's the story? It's Avram and Avimelech. Avimelech took Sarah and he was punished. And then in the end of the story, Avram himself turns to Hashem and says, "Okay, you can give Avimelech a break now." So that's the model for how to deal with it. But this is not just about personal feuds. This is also really about Averis in general. So that's where Allah Chazayin comes in. So if you see that someone's sinning, even not against you, going on the wrong path, it's a mitzvah to return him to the right path and to let him know that he's sinning against himself with his wicked deeds. Same pasuk. So interesting lashon. So I saw that some refer to Hilchos Tshuva, where the Rambam explains over there that because the person, and because Hashem doesn't decree, doesn't decide whether you'll be good or bad, so the Rambam says, you did it to yourself. Primarily, you hurt yourself. So if a person sins, the first thought is, "Hey, what did I do to myself?" That's seemingly the same line here, to let the person know you're hurting yourself. And now the Rambam is going to speak more about the style of the rebuke. How do you do it? So, whether it's a personal thing, like in halacha vav, or it's something against God, like in halacha zayin, it has to be personal, just one-on-one. And it should be calmly, softly. Make it clear that I'm only saying this for your own good. I want you to have a portion in the world to come. And if he accepts, that's good, great. But if not, you can do it a second time and a third time. And you have to keep doing it until the guy hits him and says, "I'm not listening to you anymore." So, as long as it's a conversation, as long as the guy is listening and hearing you out, that's the mitzvah. But if he doesn't want to listen, then he's not chayiv. And the question is whether the hitting is dafka or lav dafka. And the different svarim say different things. Presumably there might be a case to be made that you could just sort of assume that the person's not suddenly going to want to listen to your rebuke. Maybe you're pater technically. Limchis v'eni memacha hu nispas b'avoin elu kulam she'ef shalom lamachas b'amin. He who doesn't rebuke, so then he's actually responsible for all those sins that he could have rebuked and didn't. Now, just point out that the Rebbe actually based mitzvahim in a halachic sense on this mitzvah. So, for example, in a response from Tafshin Chav Zayin, someone wrote to the Rebbe with Tainis and Mitzvah Tefillin after the Rebbe started it. So, among other things, the Rebbe writes, Lo yoid ella, demi she'ein manatel of shari yezuk chol hadarish. If you don't take advantage, you're violating Echayach Techayach. And the Rebbe quotes this line, and you're responsible for the sin of those whom you do not bring to do mitzvah Anachas Tefillin. Hilchos Deios, Perek Vav. And similarly, in the Yisafis, the Sichos Chilek Vav, Parshas Bay, there's a whole piece there where the Rebbe responded to all the popular questions on Mitzvah Tefillin, and it's literally, it says Shaila Aleph, Meine, Shaila Beis, Meine, and there also the Rebbe cites Hilchos Deis and discusses it there, Ayin Sham. So now moving on to Mitzvah.
Not necessarily the meaning of rebuke, but you have to be positive to go out and put the mitzvah available to him.
Yeah.
It's not a point of rebuking him because he's not putting on tefillin.
The point is to actually make him, to help him.
To do better.
You're trying to be helpful.
That's it.
Yeah.
In a positive way.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's why
Yes.
Miftzayim it's the same effect. You actually put tefillin on the person. So instead of calling him over and saying, you really should be putting on tefillin, you just, here, I have a pair of tefillin, would like to put it on. That's it.
Positive.
Same thing, same effect.
Good point.
Yeah. So now for mitzvah number 7, which is not to embarrass, which is connected firstly to this same topic of rebuke. Someone who rebukes his friend first. Now what's first? I think it's referring to later. We're going to see that sometimes you could embarrass someone. But initially when you're rebuking someone, do not speak harshly until he's embarrassed. The end of the same pasuk. Means don't end up sinning yourself. So Chacham take those words, and it's Gemara in Erchen, and it says, does Echayach mean you should be telling him off until his face turns colors? Talmud Leimar, V'leisisa Olav Chet, so V'leisisa Olav Chet actually goes back on you. If you do it the wrong way, you're actually sinning. And that Gemara is the context for a lot of the halachos over here, about Leisisna and Echayach Techayach. It all comes from that Gemara in Erchen.
Does that include talking in shul?
And asking questions.
Here we see that it's usher to embarrass anyone. That's even in private, certainly in public. But you're over even in private. Even though there's no malchus, the Ram doesn't explain why. I saw some suggest that's because you don't know for sure when or how someone will be embarrassed. So it's not just what you did; it's also the person's reaction. So because your action itself isn't complete, so that might be why you don't get malchus. But Avin Gadol, don't take the wrong message. It's actually a very severe sin. Famous line from Perek Avos. You lose your share in the world to come if you make someone's face turn white from shame. You have to be very careful. Not to embarrass someone. Being cotton, being gold, doesn't matter if it's small, big, I don't know if it means in age or in stature. And that includes not to use a name or a nickname that embarrasses them, or to repeat an anecdote that makes the person cringe, makes the person feel embarrassed. That's all included in this. So even not in the context of teichacha, just in general. Yeah. So now that I'm explained, there's an exception though. If it's interpersonal, if a person is violating mitzvahs between him and Hashem, if privately he doesn't change his mind, you have to shame him publicly, and publicize his sin, we curse him out to his face and embarrass him and curse him until he gets back on the right track, which is historically what the Nevi'im did. That's what the Rambam says.
This is not, but the person is doing an Aveda, the Nista. It happens to be that the Chava knows about it, but he's not going out there publicly.
I don't know if it's one or the other.
It gives you the right to reveal, to be Megaleh.
So it's interesting. Halach, I didn't have the chance to look into it. I know it's quoted, and it's just, I don't think it's something we emphasize a lot. So I wasn't. I also wasn't planning on emphasizing it. Okay. We also have 2 more minutes, so I really have to finish. Now, it's not either be hateful or confront him to his face. If you want to not confront him and not hate him, that's even better. And you don't have to say anything. The problem is only if you actually hate him, not if you're quiet and don't say anything because you were meichel without talking to him. And now for the last mitzvah, very careful with orphans and widows because they feel very sad. Even if they have money, even if it's the king's family, you can't hurt them. What does it mean practically? To speak to them softly and to respectfully, and not to hurt them with work or with words, and to care more about the money, more than Avos Yisrael, to care more about the money than your money. Now the opposite of all those things, that's the transgression. Never mind if it's even worse, if your mom is hitting them. There's no malchus, again, for similar kind of discussion like we had before, but Hashem says there's going to be a punishment. But this calls man Shem Tzegim Muhammad Sinan and Shnemer Kim Tzar Gitzak Alai Shemay Ashmat Tzakasi. Hashem also made a contract with them, a bris, that if they scream, Hashem listens. All from those psukim about Yaman of Yasam. But if their teacher is trying to get them on the right track, then it's okay. Even then, it should be different. There should be something different about how you're treating them. Softly. Kid gloves, that's just a pasuk from Mishlei about Hashem fighting their battle. The Rambam is applying it to them. It doesn't matter if it's the father or the mother who passed away. Everyone, most people end up being an orphan at some point in their life. We mean at a young age. And someone who doesn't need an adult in their lives anymore to help them with life. Someone who's already an adult.